Is that royalty free, Tim?
Hey folks, welcome to DTLT Today. I'm Tim Owens.
And I'm Andy Rush.
And we've got actually what's turning out to be a pretty interesting episode. We were just talking around 4 o'clock today saying, so what exactly are we going to talk about? Which seems to be the very difficult thing, is how to find a topic when you're doing one of these every single day as we've been doing.
And we considered doing a show about how difficult it is
How
to come up with
to find a topic.
But that wasn't going to be...
That would have been a little bit more boring. But, Brian Alexander, as recently as yesterday, maybe even the day before, was starting to ask these questions online about how do we move past the LMS? How do we get rid of the LMS? It seemed to be the premise of the argument. And there was a lot of back and forth about, do we need to or don't we? What does that even look like? How does a university move past it? And is that even necessary? We had wanted to do sort of a hangout because, 140 characters makes it really difficult to talk about those complex issues.
Refute and rebut.
But it never quite worked out. But I figured we'd do an episode today, and we've opened up the hangout, and we've got quite a few people here. Zach, noise professor on Twitter, Zach Dowell is in there. Todd Conaway, and please remind me, ma'am, what your name is again. DePauli. Is that right? Am I saying that right? Close enough? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so...
Welcome to all of you.
Yeah, welcome, everyone. And Tom Woodward was in there for a second, but I think we scared him off with the pre-show, which I find quite hard to believe. But anyway, so there was quite a discussion there. I guess I'll start off by just asking the broader question, which is, does it even make sense for... Should the question be, how do we get rid of the LMS? Or should the question more be, how do we fix the LMS? Or are we too far gone for that? What are your opinions? Zach, you had a lot of opinions about this. So tell me a little bit about where you're coming from in terms of this.
Well, I have strong opinions about the LMS. I think the LMS is sort of like, talking about the LMS is kind of like talking about furniture. And I think what is difficult is that institutions, in their effort to meet accreditation requirements, in their effort to appease boards, in their effort to adhere to collective bargaining agreements, in their effort to get their hands around something, have unfortunately taken LMS to be synonymous with online education or distance education or teaching online. And I think that's problematic, because I think the LMS, even at its best, does nothing to capture the genius of the medium that we find ourselves in. And while it provides a basic set of what I think are probably necessary, and we even talked about that yesterday on the chat, there are certain things that, it does a lot of things that other tools do very well. And some of the discussion was that the one thing that LMS does perhaps that's difficult to find, because you can find document management things, you can find chat clients, you can find discussion clients, you can find Dropboxes and ways to accept digital submission of work from students. But it is a little difficult to find good, robust testing systems, and there was some energy around that in the discussion yesterday. But I just think it's problematic that the institutions, and maybe I'm only speaking for ours, but we have a fairly large 90,000 students in our system, and in our world, the terms LMS and online teaching are used interchangeably, and I think that's problematic.
I would completely agree. And Todd and I were in a hangout yesterday talking a little bit about the LMS, because we've been talking quite a bit here in the office recently about Canvas. Martha and I had gone to the CanvasCon conference, and I had actually learned quite a bit more about the program. To be quite honest, I don't deal a lot in the LMS, so I had no reason to really go in and start exploring it. And so I guess my conceptions of it were coming from Blackboard, which is what Todd deals with on a regular basis. And, my conception of what the LMS was is sort of getting changed quite a bit by some of what Canvas is doing and what I think other LMSs are looking towards now. It seems that the conversation is starting to change, just in terms of integrating other services versus trying to do it all in one system. And I think that seemed to have been Blackboard's approach earlier on. If we can't build it ourselves, we'll buy out the company and integrate it. So they did that with Wimba, they did it with several other companies, and there were all these add-on packs and features that to turn this into one package system. And that was one approach, but it seems like, what's happening now, what we're seeing with Pearson integrating with Google Apps and with Canvas integrating all kinds of different systems and just sort of making it a lot more modular, it seems that at least one of the approaches to the LMS now is that it becomes this base layer platform, this thing that things layer over top of. And it's just like it's there. It provides that integration for all these other separate sets of tools. It allows the professor to not have to go out to 20 different spaces to do particular tasks, and it makes it easier from in that. George Siemens had a good post called The Platforming of Education, which I think is very relevant to a discussion like this, and I'll put it in the show notes as well. What's your take on that? Todd? Others?
I agree with Zach, and I think words like "it's easier to use" scare me a little bit, and I think that that's one real attraction for teachers and students too. I think, but the long-term picture, I hope, is that we use the thing called the internet, not the LMS, or that we use the community and not the school building. And I think that the LMS has replicated, like they say, kind of all the bad things we've done in education without really taking advantage of some of the things we've kind of left behind as we've gone to a more 500 people in a room lecture model of some classroom environments. I like what our conversation yesterday was great, just hearing from you a little bit more about the Canvas space, and I've been able to see a live class in Canvas here for these past couple months, and I think it better replicates kind of what the internet does well without just boxing it all in.
And I wonder specifically in terms like that,
anyway,
if we get caught up in terms like, the LMS versus the internet. But, most LMS platforms are existing in an online space. Can they coexist, I guess, is my question, or something that I wonder in the larger version of the argument. It's like, saying, I'd rather not have Facebook, I'd rather have the internet. Well, you can have your cake and eat it too, I guess, because of the internet. But
I think people's impressions, like I know when I work with teachers here, we say, well, we use Blackboard, and almost instantly they've gone up.
Yeah.
This is my workspace. It's in the thing called Blackboard, and it's part of it's just language, I think, and I know it sounds kind of trite to say that I want to use the internet, not the LMS, but I guess what I mean is I'd rather people see online learning as the community you live in, the thing called the internet, textbooks, other human beings, just a bigger picture of learning in general, and that the internet is a piece of that.
Well, I mean,
puzzle.
Isn't the LMS, the term LMS, kind of a cringeworthy term in terms of learning management?
Right.
There really isn't any such thing as managing learning, and it's really more about, and especially when it comes to Canvas, kind of managing the tools that you use to manage your social networks, to manage your media creation and distribution, or where you're going to publish and that sort of thing. So I sometimes just even seeing the acronym or seeing the term learning management system is kind of difficult to get around, and I'm hoping that Canvas apparently, and Tim is, especially with the conferences, has investigated this further than I have, but I'm seeing some really neat things that really do kind of integrate some WordPress-esque type capabilities, especially when it comes to the publishing of rich media and that sort of thing. And the other just basic thing are things like opening a course up to the world. It's flicking a switch basically, and that tutorial, that course, that full online experience is opened up a little bit more than some of these other systems allow you to.
Well, and what's interesting.
I think that's right, Andy. I think that to the extent that the classic LMS, I mean, you think it just represents a tremendous failure of the imagination, but it's developmentally appropriate, right? So 10 years ago, when no one could get their hands around except people who were
Exactly.
WordPress jockeys or whatever,
Right.
here's something you can get your hands around. And I think that, and so I haven't looked too much at Canvas. It sounds like it's doing some things in a positive direction. Unfortunately, a lot of I mean, think about even the metaphor of Blackboard, right? Let's model exactly this, right? Because this is so effective for all students. And so I think that the approach that many of the LMS vendors have taken in the development of their software, their trajectory is to say, okay, people want to do Facebook, so let's add the fact that you can upload your own pictures so that when you're in discussion boards, we can see what you know, it's like kind of let's bolt on the sort of lamest surface things of systems that people actually want to use, and it's kind of the creepy treehouse, right? And so we'll build our own sort of private Blackboard-esque, I mean, a Facebook-esque environment, because that seems to be what students want to do. And so it sounds like the LMS that you are privy to is kind of taking a different approach and using it more as a connective mechanism, similar to the way that the DS-106 mothership was able to draw upon all different sources. Is that the direction that the one you were talking about is going?
One thing that I sort of wonder, though, with that is, like, so you can enable those features, you can do those things, but I wonder whether the trajectory is too far gone for a good majority of the faculty, to where it's like, you know, when they see something that looks like Blackboard and they know what they always were able to do in Blackboard, that they won't even explore those other options. And I mean, I guess that's why we're here to push them to do that kind of stuff. But it, you know, you have to wonder. I did, and this is very interesting, and I'm hoping that it's going to work out. I did issue a challenge to Jim Groom yesterday that I'm interested in flipping the models of DS-106, which is the digital storytelling MOOC that we did in both the spring and the summer, and we didn't actually have a course here in the fall, but it is being taught in the spring. Jim's teaching a face-to-face traditional class at Mary Washington for digital storytelling, and of course there'll be the online open component. So I said, what if you taught your traditional course using the open online tools that you always do? WordPress, feed WordPress, do all your stuff there. But I want to attempt to see if I can run the open online portion of it, or facilitate it, not quite run it, but, you know, facilitate the open online portion of it and bring everybody into Canvas and see if you could actually facilitate something like an open online course completely through that and it be effective in some way. So we're going to see if that works out. One of the issues there is actually registering students, you know, not a traditional register, but actually just a user account in our Canvas system. And so there's some political hurdles there to get over, but I think we can do it. And another thing that Clint Leyland brought up on Twitter that I thought was a salient point is that a lot of times this discussion, there's a lot of back and forth between your sysadmin and IT people and your faculty, because the pedagogical approach to something is not necessarily going to jive with what IT wants, which happens in all kinds of purchases. And, you know, a lot of times IT is getting given a larger portion of the discussion, I think, and they're always going to value reliability, scalability, you know, things like that, which usually have very little to do with a pedagogical approach to teaching.
Well, and give Canvas credit. When they came here as one of the finalists for the demos that they did, they impressed our CIO and also the network administrator in terms of how they work. So they were smart enough to kind of at least think about both sides of the equation.
Well, but that's a hosted solution. Of course they impress them because they don't have to deal with it.
This is true.
In some ways.
But in terms of, I guess, speaking of the integration in terms of our systems, they did that very well. They thought through that stuff, and they knew that was going to be an important piece to the puzzle. So
I do also wonder.
But Timmy boy, I think you're right that so much weight and effort and energy goes into, you know, let's talk about AD authentication and single sign-on and how it's all going to fit with PeopleSoft and uploading of student accounts and you know, and that's just often where it ends, because I think that Large institutional IT departments
Yeah.
are much more focused, of course,
They
on
can't
that.
bring the discussion back.
I mean, can you imagine a district IT office that had as many people that were focused exclusively on instructional technology as were focused on, back office systems and enrollment and that sort of things?
Well,
Imagine, if
and
you will.
Andy, one point that you made earlier was
Not
that, you know, certainly one direction we can take is to try and convince faculty to start using these new things in the LMS and try out these new tools and everything. But you said you could go the other way and just say you could start pushing an environment much like we've tried to do here at Mary Washington, where you're open to using new tools in general and not relying just on the LMS. And
Yeah.
it's a completely separate approach from this, where it's like, get used to the integration of all these things here and be comfortable with it. But again, the word comfortable and easy, as Todd mentioned, is not always a good thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, changing the faculty, and I've been doing this here at Mary Washington for 13 years now, and we've been over backwards, kind of trying to get faculty to kind of like the things that we've done, or at least we've had that silly attempt to do that sort of thing. And I'm at a point where it's kind of like, look, it even kind of goes back to the bag of gold talk that Gardner gave. It's like, we've got a really neat new system here that you could use if you don't want to use WordPress. And try one of these, because it's better than what you've been doing.
Right.
So, but I don't know if we can change faculty or not.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Todd.
I had a great conversation yesterday with Lisa Lane, and I will say two things. One, personally here, we have some faculty using WordPress as a platform for hybrid courses. We have one instructor this semester using 3D Game Lab as a platform for one of her classes. If I could click my fingers and all of a sudden we would move from Blackboard to any other product, I wouldn't do it.
Sure.
It would cause chaos. And that chaos, in the end, would be very detrimental to the movement we're making forward in online learning. So that's one thing. Lisa told me yesterday she's on sabbatical right now, and she's doing some amazing things. She's been a real advocate for open platform learning environments or whatever. But this spring, she's teaching 5 courses, and there's like around 40 people in each one. And she says, so am I going to make 3 of them are different classes? So how does a teacher use these open spaces without like working 27 hours a day to communicate, to grade, or whatever their daily things are, It just made me, it was a very real life thing where I just went, DS 106 was like one class, and I think that was the one class Jim was teaching or whatever, and it seemed to work. But what if you have 4 of those things? Is it easier just to shove it all into an LMS and do automatic true-false question grading?
And I think Jim would be the first to admit that method of teaching can be exhausting, even for just one course. That using all of these different tools and DS 106 and everything, like, it can be exhausting to stretch yourself in that matter. So I totally agree. And it brings me back to the fact that you don't have to have just one system. You don't have to say it's either or, right? You don't have to say we have to get rid of the LMS and move towards open products, or we have to get rid of all these open online stuff and move everybody into the LMS where we can control them. You're going to have your faculty members, like the people here in our office and the people that we work with that want to use other different tools. They'll do their own thing, and they'll figure it out, and they'll do really interesting stuff with WordPress, with wikis, with all these different online tools. And then you're going to have the faculty who are very comfortable in the LMS. And my goal in that space then is, let's improve the LMS. And it seems like the market is starting to get there, where they're starting to understand these things like integration with other services, with opening up courses to the public, and I could go on and on about all these different things that I'm starting to see from certain companies, not from all of them, which is unfortunate. But the trajectory and the movement, I think, is there, which which I'm glad to see. Which is why I sort of took issue with Brian Alexander's point, which was how do we move past the LMS? It was like that seemed to me to be the wrong question to be asking from the get-go. Is like how do we get rid of the LMS? I think that does more damage than it does good in the long run, because why can't you have both? And Mikhail, you joined us, and I'm interested on your take on this. I don't know, does Baruch use Blackboard, or are they currently looking, what LMS do they have, and how do you all do in terms of support for that? Hey.
Hey guys. All of CUNY uses Blackboard. We're married to it for the next 4 or 5 years. They just signed a new contract for hosting for about $5 million.
We feel for you.
So, yeah, right. While there is some talk of playing around with things like Moodle and now Canvas, the official IT line is that the CUNY has an LMS, and that's the LMS you need to use. But there are alternatives. Blogs Group, which oversees one. Other schools have been using other stuff, but mainly in WordPress. I think there's a Moodle install floating around somewhere at the grad center. So that's our story there. I don't see us as an institution moving to anything other than Blackboard for a long time. Part of the reason I actually heard this repeated at Open Ed was that if we were to say, okay, faculty, here you go, here's something a lot better, and that does a lot more and much more useful, they'll flip out because it's not Blackboard. So there's kind of a Stockholm syndrome with Blackboard here.
And we went from we actually did. It's about at least a 3-year transition window at the very least. We transitioned from Blackboard to Desire to Learn, and yeah, there are people that are still. We did that going on 4 years ago. People that are still whining and holding out, lighting the flame, and keeping the flame lit that we will somehow move back to Blackboard, which would be another 3-year transition, by the way.
Well, what if you were to skin it like Blackboard? See, I think that's what we should do.
Just don't tell them that anything changed.
What you do is
Desire to Blackboard.
It's the new version of Blackboard. It's the upgrade. That happens all the time.
Exactly.
So it's just this is Blackboard 11.
They don't like the new version though. That's a year and a half long process.
It's all about kind of
version,
managing the freak out. And it's always going to happen.
Yeah.
And I will say, we mentioned it on a previous episode that Mary Washington, surprisingly, did not run the two systems simultaneously at all, did not do a slow rollout. We, within 4 months, completely just flipped the switch on it after we decided we were going Canvas. And
yeah.
I haven't been privy to all of the conversations happening with all the faculty members, but I think many like it. From the ones that don't like it, typically don't like an LMS in general, which is okay with me.
Well, and it also goes back to the idea that the LMS is so many different things to different people. I mean, you can have the LMS kind of as your repository for your syllabus, and that's it. Mm-hmm. It's an easy place to put a couple of documents, and you've got your course space out on the web somewhere. And I think those people, I don't know if they're going to be the ones that freak out the most or not, but it's all about kind of managing all the different uses of the LMS too, and the people that are freaking out can be for, I think, any reason. So I think you just have to kind of get prepared, and maybe Todd, you could say, what different kind of management, what do you use your LMS for, and go forward and kind of say, well, here's a suggestion to kind of move into a middle ground and see if you can't use it in a different way, and then try to get the, because what I see is Blackboard being this $5 million system or whatever. You're paying too much for what the minimal amount of what a standard LMS does. If you can get something like Canvas kind of into the sphere of things and get it used in the right ways, anybody can use the LMS for basic things. But I don't know, that might be too simplistic.
Do you guys host it?
Say that again?
You host Canvas? Do you host Canvas at UNW?
They host it.
We're having Instructure host it. We're not hosting it ourselves, so we're not using their open source product.
Can you give us a sense of what that runs about? I'm just curious to know.
It wasn't inexpensive It was a lot less. It was probably half the price of Blackboard. That's a really rough estimate. Um, but the other thing is, Blackboard also gets you in like simple things like disk space. You know, we were paying outrageous amounts to get a little bit more disk space, and you know, Canvas just they didn't do that. And obviously they want to kind of get their foot in the market, so they're probably a little bit more forgiving.
I think it's important to bring up that scale is an issue here too, though. I mean, what is UMW? What's your FTE?
We
We're at
have
How many students do you have?
4,500 undergrads, and there's a graduate, probably another 1,000 graduate.
Right, and so Mikhail's scale is like, you know, we have 90,000 students. How many students do you have, Mikhail?
We have a 250,000.
Right.
Right, so it's. I think that, and I'm not to say anything other than that's a really big part of the discussion when you're talking about transitioning between, when you're talking about hosting, when you're talking about paying for it. But Andy, you brought up a good point, and Todd, I know you were going to say something, so I won't talk for longer than 1 second. But it is really talking about the LMS is like talking about furniture, and it is what you do with it, I think. And so as long as, to me, my efforts are to keep that conversation. Here's where you start. You want to put up your syllabus, great. Now what are you doing with everything else? This is fine as a front door, as a homeroom, if you will, as a place to go that provides convenient linking to student management or enrollment systems that provides some level of security and comfort for people that have those issues. And then, but this is not where you stop. This is where you start, and it's a start. It's a crawl, walk, run thing, and that's
Todd,
the
go
crawl,
ahead.
right?
I think a lot of the things we've dreamt about or talked about, they're happening already. They're going to happen whether we push for WordPress or Canvas or Black. It's already happening. You know, YouTube is a great example of. So there you are in your LMS. You're working in it for 3 years. You discover this thing called YouTube. You make your own video telling your students smart things, and you put it in your class. And all of a sudden, you realize, oh, look, it's out there on the internet too. And so it's a hyperlink. You can get it from anywhere. It can go anywhere. And I think that SlideShare, Twitter, I mean, all these things we use are all part of that growth that's just going to happen. And we're going to all go, let's use the right tool for the right thing. So you use the Blackboard gradebook, you use YouTube for video, you use Twitter for short, instant communication, you use whatever. And I think that's where we're all going to go anyway.
And I've had
And
conversations
it's already
recently
happening.
with a professor who, wanted to get away from the LMS because he wanted to go to WordPress. I'm like, okay, yeah, let's talk about it for a little bit. And it ended up being because he didn't have enough space in his course in Canvas for all the files he wanted to store. And I said, well, okay. So we started looking into UMW blogs and that kind of thing. He wanted me to completely lock it down to only his students. Not even all of Mary Washington could view his stuff, just his students, password protect everything, upload his files because he had scanned in complete copyrighted books into his course and he wanted them to be able to read it. So my point being that there are ways to use these great tools like WordPress in very poor ways, and just in that there are ways to use the LMS in really amazing ways, I think. And so that line gets very blurry.
And there's even the controversy that got kind of stirred up about how many people are using the LMS, and
Right.
It gets back even to the definition of what is using, because Canvas was very excited when it was told that our use was so high compared to Blackboard, and then it gets down to the definition of what is use.
Right.
And do people have an account there? Are people putting any documents there? We also have the joke at Mary Washington that Blackboard was essentially a repository for PowerPoint slides that had copyright issues with them. They could hide it behind a wall, and they didn't want to. They wouldn't be able to share it in a place like SlideShare or on YouTube. So,
Right.
the uses is another kind of area that we need to deal with as well.
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered this topic pretty much to its death. If we've decided anything, I think it's that there are tons of tools out there. There will continue to be. There are going to be changes in the LMS market. Hopefully those changes are for the better. It seems like in some ways that is the case, depending on which company you're with and which product you're using. But ultimately what it comes down to is that you've got in my eyes, that you've got good support personnel that are looking at it from a pedagogical aspect, similar to what we're doing here at DTLT today, and helping guide those decisions, at least in some respect and fashion, both on the faculty level, on the purchasing decision side, and everything else.
Well, and I think getting back to the Gardner Campbell thing, I think what we need to do is evangelize and kind of push for the bags of gold, you know, and say, there's all this stuff out there that's going to make you do this stuff in such a experiential way. We got to try to push in that direction, I guess.
Sure.
Any other final thoughts from you guys?
You guys wrapped it up beautifully.
We're pros, you know.
Yep.
You're my
Bag of gold.
biggest fan, Zach.
We appreciate your support.
Well, thank you all for watching
Nice.
DTLT today. We appreciate your time and the discussion, and we'll continue to have it both in the comment field at dtlttoday.com and beyond.
All right.
Take
Thanks.
care, folks.
See ya.
Thank you.